The Advent of the Messiah, Section 1, Part 4. The limit of salvation through redemption by the cross and the purpose of the Lord's second advent. If Jesus had not been crucified, what would have happened? He would have accomplished the providence of salvation both spiritually and physically. He would have established the kingdom of heaven on earth, which would last forever, as expressed in the prophecy of Isaiah 9, 6-7. In the instruction of the angel appearing to Mary, Luke 1, 31-33, and in Jesus' own words announcing the imminence of the kingdom of heaven, Matthew 4, 17. God first created man's flesh with the earth, and then he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life and made him into a living soul, Genesis 2, 7. Man was created to have both spirit and body. His fall also came about both spiritually and physically. Naturally, salvation must include both spirit and body. Since the purpose of Jesus' advent as the Messiah was to accomplish the providence of restoration, he should have fulfilled the salvation of both spirit and body. To believe in Jesus means to become one body with him. Therefore, Jesus likened himself to the true vine and his followers to its branches. John 15, 5. He said, "You will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." John 14, 20. Jesus said this because, coming in the flesh, he wanted to save fallen men both spiritually and physically. If they had become one with him in both spirit and body by believing in him, fallen men could have been saved both spiritually and physically, because the Jewish people disbelieved Jesus and delivered him up for crucifixion. His body was invaded by Satan, and he was killed. Therefore, even when Christians believe in and become one body with Jesus, whose body was invaded by Satan, their bodies still remain subject to Satan's invasion. In this manner, however devout a man of faith may be, he cannot fulfill physical salvation by redemption through Jesus' crucifixion alone. Since the original sin lineally transmitted from Adam has not been liquidated, any saint, however devout he may be, still has original sin and cannot help giving birth to the children of original sin. To prevent the condition of satanic invasion, which constantly comes through the flesh due to the original sin, we have to torment and deny our flesh in order to live a religious life. We must pray constantly, 1 Thessalonians 5:17, in order to prevent the condition of satanic invasion that comes because of original sin, which has not been annihilated, even through redemption by the cross. Jesus could not accomplish the purpose of the providence of physical salvation because his body was invaded by Satan. However, he could establish the basis for spiritual salvation by forming a triumphant foundation for resurrection through the redemption by the blood of the cross. Therefore, all the saints since the resurrection of Jesus through the present day have enjoyed the benefit of the providence of spiritual salvation only. Salvation through redemption by the cross is spiritual only. Even in devout men of faith, the original sin remains in the flesh and is transmitted continuously from generation to generation. The more devout a saint becomes in his faith, therefore, the more severe becomes his fight against sin. Thus, Christ must come again on the earth to accomplish the purpose of the providence of the physical as well as the spiritual salvation by redeeming the original sin, which has not been liquidated even through the cross. As mentioned before, even the saints redeemed by the cross have had to continue to fight against original sin. That is why even Paul, who was the center of faith among the disciples, lamented over his inability to prevent sin from invading his flesh, saying, "So then I myself serve the law of God with my mind, but with my flesh I serve the law of sin." Romans 7, 22-25. He said this to express the joy of the fulfillment of spiritual salvation, as well as to deplore the failure to accomplish physical salvation. Again in 1 John 1, 8-10, John confessed, saying, "If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us." Thus we can gain salvation through the crucifixion of Jesus, cannot escape from being sinners, because the original sin still works in us. Again, thus we who can gain salvation through the crucifixion of Jesus cannot escape from being sinners, because the original sin still works in us. Section 5, two kinds of prophecy concerning the cross. What must be the reason then that in Isaiah 53, Jesus' suffering on the cross is prophesied, if his crucifixion was not the result of God's predestination? Until now, many people have thought that the prophecies in the Bible about Jesus foretold only his suffering. When we read the Bible anew with the knowledge of the principle, we can understand that just as the prophet Isaiah foretold in the Old Testament age, Isaiah 9, 11, 60, and as the angel of God prophesied to Mary, Jesus was expected to become the king of the Jews in his lifetime and establish on earth an everlasting kingdom, of which there will be no end, Luke 1, 31-33. Let us then investigate why there were two kinds of prophecies. God created man to be perfected only by accomplishing his portion of responsibility. However, in actuality, the first human ancestors fell without having accomplished their portion of responsibility. Thus, man could either accomplish his portion of responsibility in accordance with God's will, or on the contrary, not accomplish it against God's will. To give an example from the Bible, it was man's portion of responsibility not to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam could perfect himself by obeying God's commandment not to eat of the fruit. On the other hand, he could die by eating the fruit, as actually happened. God gave the 10 Commandments to the people of the Old Testament age as a condition of man's responsibility in the providence of salvation. Thus, man could be saved by keeping the commandments or be ruined by not keeping them. It was the Israelites' portion of responsibility to obey Moses' command on their way from Egypt to the blessed land of Canaan. They could enter the blessed land of Canaan by obeying Moses' command, or not enter it by disobeying his command. In fact, God willed that Moses lead the Israelites into the blessed land of Canaan, and commanded him to do so, Exodus 3:8. But due to their disbelief, the people perished in the wilderness, leaving only their posterity to reach the destination. Man thus has his own responsibility to accomplish, and he may fulfill it according to God's will, or not fulfill it against his will, thus resulting in only one of the two possibilities being realized. Therefore, it was inevitable for God to give two kinds of prophecy regarding the fulfillment of his will. It was God's portion of responsibility to send the Messiah, but to believe in him was man's responsibility. Therefore, the Jewish people could either believe in the Messiah according to God's will, or not believe in him against his will. Therefore, God had to give two kinds of prophecy, thus providing for two possible results, according to man's success or failure to accomplish his responsibility. God prophesied both about what might happen if the Jewish people failed to believe in the Messiah, as was written in Isaiah 53, and about what would happen if they fulfilled his will in glory by believing in and serving the Messiah, as was recorded in Isaiah 9, 11, and 60, and Luke 1:30. However, due to the disbelief of the people, Jesus died on the cross. The prophecy of Isaiah 53 was realized, thus leaving the others to be accomplished after the Lord's second advent. Section 6. Biblical verses written as if Jesus' crucifixion were inevitable. In the Bible, we find many verses written as if Jesus' suffering through the crucifixion was inevitable. One of the representative examples of this is that Jesus reproached Peter, who tried to dissuade him when he prophesied about his suffering on the cross, and said, "Get behind me, Satan," Matthew 16:23. Otherwise, how could Jesus reproach Peter so bitterly? In fact, Jesus would then resolve to take the cross as a condition of indemnity to pay for the accomplishment of even the spiritual salvation of man. When he found that he was unable to accomplish the providence of both spiritual and physical salvation, Luke 9:31. In that situation, Peter's dissuading him from taking the way of the cross was a hindrance to the providence of spiritual salvation through the cross, so he reproached Peter. In the next place, when Jesus uttered his last words on the cross saying, "It is finished," John 19:30, he did not mean that the whole purpose of the providence of salvation was attained through the cross. Knowing that the disbelief of the people was at that point inalterable, Jesus chose the way of the cross in order to establish the foundation of the providence of spiritual salvation, leaving the providence of physical salvation to the time of the second advent. Therefore, Jesus meant by the words, "It is finished," that he finished establishing the basis for the providence of spiritual salvation through the cross, which was the secondary providence of salvation. In order for us to have a right faith, we must first establish direct rapport with God in spirit through ardent prayer, and next we must understand the truth through correct reading of the Bible. This is the reason that Jesus told us to worship God in spirit and truth, John 4:24. From the time of Jesus through the present, all Christians have thought that Jesus came to the world to die. This is because they did not know the fundamental purpose of Jesus coming as the Messiah and entertained the wrong idea that spiritual salvation was the only mission for which Jesus came to the world. Jesus came to accomplish the will of God in his lifetime, but had to die a reluctant death due to disbelief of the people. There must first appear on the earth the bride who can relieve the humiliated and grieving heart of Jesus before Christ, as the bridegroom can come again, this time to complete his mission with his bride. Jesus said, "Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" Luke 18:8, in lamentation over the possible ignorance of the people which he could foresee. We have clarified the fact that Jesus did not come to die, but if we ask Jesus directly through spiritual communication, we can see the fact even more clearly. When direct rapport is impossible, we should seek the testimony of someone with such a gift in order to have this kind of faith that will entitle us to be the bride in order to receive the Messiah.